looking at the second, somewhat belatedly arriving episode of The Cruise with myself, Craig Campbell, and Mr. Jim Grant. We don't have to tell you where we're located. I'm hoping you're using a VPN already. And we got a lot to talk about. It's the 18th of April, 2020, and neither of us have any credentials in any way what we're about to talk about, but we're witnesses, just like you are, to one of the maddest periods in history. We can all easily agree on. We're locked in our homes. We're only allowed to leave for certain necessary items. I think we're allowed to go driving to somewhere we can go running, maybe. But I think they want you to go for a walk from your house if you leave your house at all. There's a lot of ambiguity. As if you're following anything on the internet, you'll notice a lot is being interpreted by the officers on the ground as they go along. You'll notice a lot of that happening. But regardless, I'm a bit ebullient, perhaps, because there's been some good news this week. There's been some pushback against the WHO, which if you bother checking my Facebook or my Twitter, you'll see that I was pushing back against the WHO a long time ago when they weren't able to get into China, when apparently there was a massive pandemic taking place and bodies were stacking up all over the shop. And the WHO was like calling, is there some point we might be able to pop in and have a tea ceremony, or could we get access to your country? Just nonsense that any sort of governing body type status was being represented by these utter charlatans, who, of course, if you dig even deeper, you'll know and realize they have a background in terror, I guess you want to call it that. So within their own countries, these are appointed bodies. They are being overly funded to gargantuan controlling interest degrees by utter charlatans and famous depopulationist eugenicists like Mr. Bill Gates, who, if you want to entertain yourself, just go onto his Twitter, go onto his Instagram, just read comments. You want to have a good time, anytime, just read the Bill Gates comments. There's a lot of pushback against that freak right now. He's tied in the WHO in synchronicity with Mr. Fauci, Mr. Anthony Fauci, who's part of Trump's coronavirus action team. And now I think we're going to move into a capacity where Jim will take you through some of the specifics of what they're being accused of, because there's a very, very odd link now that the very people who are involved in the coronavirus task force may well be, and in many camps are definitely responsible, at least in part, for the proliferation of this bacterium across the world, this virus that apparently more and more people are thinking didn't arrive from a morphing behavior in a bat soup, but very much more specifically, and again, some camps are 100% betting the house on that, in fact, it did come out either accidentally or purposefully from the Level 4 Bio Lab built by the French and financed, I believe they know now that actually Mr. Soros owns the, at least in part, the building. So there's a lot of big players involved in this. But regardless, Mr. Anthony Fauci, who is also part of the coronavirus task force from Trump's administration, in the time of Obama, through the National Health Organization, or the NIH, the National Institute for Health in the States, to the tune of about $3.7 million, was involved in the gain of function studies on this particular virus, which was against, at that time, and still is, moratorium that was set out by the U.S. itself. So it looks like one of the U.S.'s own government doctors was doing a side deal for probably reasons of ethical or morality to outsource to the Chinese to be involved in gain-of-function testing that either was shut down because they shut down Fort Detrick, if most people aren't aware of that, which is one of the U.S.'s main creators of bioweaponry and chemical weaponry. That was closed down, I believe, in August of 2019 because of its prolific record of losing track of and having escapes of their bioweapons. So the government actually, can you imagine like how what kind of like oopsie-daisies you got to do on a regular basis before the U.S. government says that you've made enough bioweapons, please stop doing it anymore in our midst. So these people created this weapon, either sold or gave it to the Chinese. It's looking more and more like provided for, again, during the Obama administration, and to the tune of at least $3.7 million. And now, ironically, it's out in the public sphere again, either accidentally or on purpose. And the very same man is involved in trying to prevent its proliferation through the States, or through the world at this point. And funnily enough, will not hear of anybody's interest in curing coronavirus illness, the COVID-19 illness, in any other way than, we need a vaccine, and we got to know where you are 24/7, and we got to implant you with a way to count how many vaccines you got so that we can see it on a big computer screen. And everything like that is normal. and if you think you want to push back against that, you're crazy. So I think I can now turn to Jim to put some names and dates, perhaps, to the things that I've just rattled off, or some potential framework of we try on the cruise to provide as much mainstream corroboration of our suppositions as we can along the way. And we'll look forward also to leaving you a bibliography at the end that Mr. Grant will be pleased to send links to, so that you can investigate this yourself if you have the spare time and want or need. So I'll turn over now to Mr. Jim Grant to bring legitimacy to my this is where we're at talk.
Well, I hadn't got the links on like that advanced stage of it, although I've got the research on to do. I think everything you just said there is a podcast in itself about the game. So I think that will be on.
That's why I got to talk quickly.
For now, I want to just start with the real basics of.
Sure. Ease them in.
Because there are going to be people that just go,
what the living Christ? Why does that guy who looks like Rasputin, why is he screaming at me?
Yeah, so everything you've just said there is a podcast in itself, but I want to go one step back and go through to the real basic, the basic premise that some people still think that this wasn't made in a lab. I want to start at
those people?
The basics first of all. Those people.
This just picks up, Jim, with like a dozen conversations that I have on a loop in my world, that just every once in a while you run into people that just like, no, there's one, you gotta quit eating bats.
I think there's a lot of people out there that are starting to question the narrative of the mainstream media, and I want this podcast.
And can we not say, Jim, that they're probably doing so because the mainstream media is now questioning their own narrative, right?
Which is the perfect place for us to start. You made a point about the bibliography. All the links that I'm going to talk about here this evening can be found in the comment section of our Facebook page or the comment section of our YouTube platform as well.
As long as they last.
Every single article will be there in the comment section for people to look at. So moving on to, first of all, I should probably give my welcome. Welcome podcast,
Mr. Jim
episode 2. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a good whatever time you've decided to click play on us here. So, moving with the first article. This is from the New York Post by Ben Hurd, and this is April the 16th, 2020. Everything we know about the Wuhan lab that may have unleashed coronavirus. New evidence has emerged that the coronavirus ravaging the globe may have escaped from a poorly equipped lab in Wuhan, China, where researchers were conducting risky viral disease experiments in the years leading up to the pandemic.
And weren't shy about documenting them in nature journals. Right? That's part of it, right?
I've got all of that on my archive, as you know. But let's do the walking.
These people weren't shy.
Let's run on the next podcast. You know, that would be my, because I understand there's a lot of people that are going to be when I say a lot of people, I think our first podcast got up to I think it's over 500,000 views now, over 500 views now. So I'm happy about it. I don't know how many people.
Half bots for sure. Half bots, Russian bots.
Yeah, I don't know how many people are going to be comfortable with going as far down the rabbit hole to begin with. So let's take it on a step-by-step basis for me. So in March 2018, the US dispatched science diplomats to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, who issued two sensitive diplomatic cables about inadequate safety measures at the lab, the Washington Post reported. The first cable warned the experiments conducted in the lab on coronavirus in bats represented a risk of a new SARS-like pandemic, according to the report. The cable, written by two US-China embassy officials, said there is a serious shortage of appropriately trained technicians and investigators needed to safely operate this high-containment laboratory, according to the report. The Wuhan lab was receiving aid from US organizations, including a laboratory at the University of Texas Medical Branch, but the cable suggested that the US should provide additional support because the research was so dangerous. The cables were meant to sound the alarm about safety conditions in the lab, and the embassy officials were calling for more support of the lab to help fix its problems, sources told the newspaper. There's no evidence to suggest the coronavirus currently cutting its way across the globe was engineered in a lab, but that does not exclude the possibility it escaped from the Wuhan Institute or another similar laboratory miles away in the Chinese city. And what we're going to do tonight on this podcast is we're going to blitz a load of articles from around the world saying roughly the same thing, to say, do you know what? The idea that anyone dismisses the idea this was made in a lab, I'm afraid is nothing more than a conspiracy theorist at this point. And why a conspiracy theorist at this point? Well, let's look at the reasons that China would have to lie. Imagine the payouts they would have to pay in compensation if this was found to be them. Why would the original scientists then say and perpetuate this lie? Well, can you imagine what it does? China isn't exactly nice to its political dissidents, organ harvesting, etc., etc. So can you imagine if two scientists, well, you saw what happened to the doctor that just tried to say, hey, there's a disease here. Imagine what would happen to the scientists who said, we may be liably responsible for billions of economic damage. Do you think those people's life insurance premium may increase after making that statement? So there's a direct motive, which brings us on to number two of why people may be lying about it. Well, not that people are lying about this, but the fact that your mainstream media may not be correct. Let's not make aspersions as to why they may not be correct, but here's a story, again, from the New York Post, the day afterwards here. This is by the Post editorial board, so it looks like people higher up have got involved in it. I don't know much about journalism, but it says Post editorial board. It looks like someone's gone back in and backed up their original writers. So here we are. I love this one. Facebook's fact checkers are the real fake news after censoring Post story. So way back in February 2013, the Post ran an opinion piece by Stephen Mosher saying that we couldn't trust China's story about the origins of COVID-19. He argued that the virus might, and that's the New York Post using those two words here, have jumped to the human population thanks to errors at a Chinese laboratory in Wuhan, rather than via that city's now notorious wet market. The piece was widely read online until Facebook stepped in. The social media giants fact checkers decided this was not a valid opinion. It tried to share Mosher's column on Facebook. The social network stuck a false information alert on top, saying the finding was checked by independent fact checkers and preventing your friends from clicking to connect to the original article to see for themselves. Again, this was an opinion column, not a news report.
Well, you're not allowed opinions for a start. This is the new brave new world. Opinions are verboten also, like ourselves, like I said at the beginning, we are established as not experts in any field. Why we're not allowed to have open chat on Facebook about any topic matter and be very, very wrong, like for any purposes, is we're into a very dark era. But that an opinion piece can't just stand on its own as opinion without worrying about Facebook stepping into it is quite worrying times. But also, we have to look at why these things are not being addressed in terms of the honesty behind who actually created the coronavirus, the COVID-19 itself, which is looking increasingly more and more like it was an American lab, which then brought it to China. So this brings into the whole cover story of Trump's. You now can see several different songs that are cut with the China virus. It's from China. That angle is quite clearly now an attempt to take American blame out of it, because as you know, we're dealing with a lab itself that has National Institute of Health investment in it, that was built by the French, that is entirely sanctioned and approved by the WHO. The scientists within it studied for years to be competent in a level 4 biolab in Western labs. All of their experience comes from us. Their raw materials look likely to come from us. There is no reason other than the location of the experimentation and the potential leak that this is a China virus. It's very much our virus that the Chinese took from us or bought from us. So, there's a lot of subterfuge and disinformation going on for different people's purposes. I think that the nexus of Trump pushing back against Fauci and Tedros and the WHO is beneficial for humanity at large, because Gates is in that sphere of influence also. But do I think that Trump has been 100% forthcoming, especially regarding this virus? We just know that's not the case. We know there's information that they have and they received from the return of military members who were at the Wuhan military games in October of 2019. They know that they were studied upon return to the States, and they know that they have not been forthcoming with those studies. They know that those exist. So the Yanks are not showing their cards here as much as they're accusing others when in fact they're involved in the behavior of those they're accusing. There's a lot going on here, but I just want people to know that we're also aware of the foibles of those who are accusing China, just as much as we're incredibly harsh, like Jim mentioned, the Uyghur camps that have been in existence in China for years and years. That those are ideological prisoners, including the Falun Gong people. That there are at least, I think the last time I looked deeply into it, at least a half dozen Western media investigations that confirmed that indeed organ harvesting has taken place, that they're involved in deprogramming programs, that the families of some of the inmates are supplanted with other men of, I guess, more upstanding Chinese morality or Communist Party assessment of morality that they agree with. And then those men are put in the families of the missing men, some of them having their organs harvested at that time, to then be the father figure, to exist as the family unit on an artificial basis placed there by the Chinese Communist Party. So, I'm on nobody's side here.
What we're saying is we're not China bashers, we're not Trump bashers. Our only horse in this race is getting to the truth. However, Facebook seems to have something differently. Now, why might they want to silence the New York Post's piece? I wonder. Allow me to continue.
Yes, please.
How exactly did Facebook, I'm going back to the article here from the New York Post, how exactly did Facebook determine that Moshe's reasoned arguments constituted false information?
Right.
Well, in fact, it didn't so determine. Rather, it was an independent fact checker. And remember what I'd like to look up the word
they outsourced
in the dictionary, because allow me to continue.
Yeah.
And who did this fact checker rely on for their opinion? As reporter Cheryl Atkinson notes, one expert consulted had a clear conflict of interest.
How?
She has regularly worked with Wuhan's researchers and even done her own experiments there. Danielle E. Anderson, assistant professor, Duke-NUS Medical School in Singapore, personally assisted to the lab's strict control and containment measures. Anderson did admit, however, that Moshe was correct when he mentioned that SARS did twice escape from a Beijing research lab in 2004.
Yeah.
So they've got form.
Yeah. They've been leaking
has
before.
A conflict of interest, and Facebook knows both these things and has
gives them a
decided
dingle
to censor anyway. You know, the first.
Can you give us an opinion on an opinion piece that we want to cancel?
Do you know the first thing I did when I did that? I opened up an account on Gab, which is the social media competitor to Facebook. It's nowhere near Facebook yet, but that's the first thing I did.
Yeah.
In utter disgust at them.
Thank you. Yeah, well done.
What do you think of that? The fact checker they used to do the research, to check these so-called facts or opinion pieces about Wuhan actually worked in the Wuhan lab. What are the odds of that? Why would Facebook even want to go down that road?
Because truth doesn't matter, Jim. It doesn't matter. It's a new narrative. It's it's a dragon chasing its tail. It doesn't matter anymore what the truth is. The subterfuge is larger and has a larger catchment, the larger reach. What Facebook prints in opinion as truth will reach more people than the article that they're limiting with the warning, right? Like it's an algorithm thing, right? They're going to put you out of the news cycle. That's all that's happening now anyway. You know, the shadow banning that takes place, and you know that's the new imprisonment.
It's fascist book.
I didn't want to say that. I overuse the word fascist, Jim. I know I do it. So to my detractors, I don't want to throw him a bone. He's just on the fascist thing again. But yes, of course they are.
There are videos of the Nazis burning books.
Yeah,
this is electronic.
Same thing.
So moving on to another article here. This is Guildmore Health News. I'd never heard of this website. And anyone that says, I don't really want to listen to something that I don't know, you're entirely correct to do so. But what I suggest you do is go and look at what the article says instead to see if this is accurate. And I actually found it from other sources. And usually it's sites like this that become mainstream within a couple of weeks.
The name of it, Jim? I missed it.
So this is the article, Guildmore Health News, which incidentally will be the article that I show that there's one scientist that says it still thinks it's bat soup, but that's actually from Guildmore Health News as well. So the one website that you may not...
He's just in the corner on a bong. Just ask him. No, not till he's done. The whole thing. He's trying to win a contest for a t-shirt. Dude, ask him about the bat soup thing. Jesus, it's just madness. It's madness. You know, it wouldn't be such madness, Jim, if it didn't take place right. And this is my issue also. You know, you can imagine. Look at me, I've got issues. But the thing I was thinking of when you were talking about the proposal of the potential of a leak from the biolab in Wuhan is like, it's just it hits me every time it's discussed, and it hit me again when you were speaking. It's just like, why in the city? Why in God's name, when you know that like Beijing just up the road has had 2 at least documented leaks from their biolab, which I don't believe is level 4 even. I think the Wuhan one is the only level 4 one in the country, which is why their staff were training with other Western staff in other level 4 labs that existed in other places that weren't China. But why in hell's name? Why would the level 4 biolab be only like 20 miles from the center of town? Why would it be so near the seafood market to begin with? It's the kind of thing, like, the Brits have theirs in Portendown, right? Like, you want it away from people. You want it in the bush a bit, right? Like, why in living hell would the Chinese Communist Party, the WHO sanctioning the building itself, the French building the building itself, Soros, to my knowledge, owning the building itself, why would you put something of that sensitivity of the potential of a leak in a major population center? It's utter madness. It's insane madness that you would like put that kind of risk in a high population center. And like, I don't know if you have ever seen the biomaterial that they handle, but I believe, you may correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure like Ebola and like is it Nile hemorrhagic fever? What's the I forget the prefix of hemorrhagic fever, but like to my knowledge, like Ebola, the final stages of hemorrhagic fever are just like your blood vessels just fucking explode all over the fucking walls. To my knowledge, like I'm not exactly sure, but I think like certainly with some responses in Ebola, you just like for the last little while, your eyes just fucking pop out of your head and blast across the room, and like you are like physically openly hemorrhaging, bleeding out of your orifices on like anything within Spider-Man range. Like, it's fucking brutal. And to my knowledge, those don't need a level 4 biolab. To my knowledge. Like, I think a 2 or a 3 do okay with those. And just for people's knowledge, a lot of people don't know that the Japanese, when they were first attempting to create level 4 rated biolabs, I can't be quoted on it, but I think they started in 91 and like didn't process any level 4 material 18, 20 years later. Honestly, like they were level 2 for a long time until they like figured out how to get their shit in the right type of bags and make sure that every air room is reverse airlocked. So if anything escapes, that it's being sucked back into the room down a hole. Like it's major complexity of a challenge to begin with, and the idea that like, they're using these things in a major population center. I think Wuhan being 15, 16 million documented people. Madness! Like, take that shit to Siberia or Antarctica or fucking Greenland or, just like the Yukon. What the living fuck are you doing this stuff in Fort Detrick, being North Carolina, Kentucky does it, I believe, as well. I don't know what the population base is around there, but like Winnipeg is mentioned in the nexus of this BS. Winnipeg's a pretty major Canadian city. Why they have a level 4 biolab within even fucking, a plane's worth of fuel distance from human beings in a place that's as easy to find uninhabited terrain as Canada is completely fucked up. And it just is another window into how incredibly fucked up the humans are, that against international moratoriums to do the opposite because of completely sane scientists that just say, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't make what's already hideous fucking worse. And I certainly wouldn't do it to then hand it to militaries to be the moral and ethical authority on what's done with it next. That's a known thing, and they keep doing it, and that's why I hate them, Jim. I hate them passionately. I hope you feel that off of me.
I'm sure the audience can feel that. So, We already have heard from Professor Francis Boyle, the author of the United Nations Bioweapons Treaty, that he said it was definitely man-made. Yeah. Joining that now is Professor Luc Montagnier, and I recommend everyone does their research on who this man is, so I'll spell his name. In fact, the articles will be in the comments section of them, but it's Luc, as in Jean-Luc Picard, Montagnier. And he is the 2008 Nobel Prize winner for medicine. But not if that wasn't enough.
What a dick.
He is also the man who discovered the HIV virus back in 1983. So it looks like this guy kind of knows stuff about
the French dude.
Science,
Yes, I saw his article.
Knows what he's talking about.
How funny, yes. You got a translated version, did you? Amazing.
That is being pushed by the mainstream that COVID-19 virus was the result of a natural mutation and that it was transmitted to humans from bats via
Good digging, Jim Grant.
Yeah, Dr. Luc Montagnier, the man who discovered the HIV virus back in 1983, disagrees and says that the virus was man-made. He claims that the SARS-CoV-2 is a manipulated virus that was accidentally released from a laboratory in Wuhan, China. Chinese researchers have said to have used coronaviruses in their work to develop an AIDS vaccine. HIV RNA fragments are believed to have been found in the SARS-CoV-2 genome. Yeah. So,
like from the beginning that we heard, and now mainstream news is flexing to do damage control, basically, to come back to the belief that there's a chance that it could be, when it's quite clear that it was made in a lab, that there's a chance it could have been made in a lab is basically what MSM is going with right now. No?
Yeah. I'm going to blitz through a load of articles.
Because they've won a lot of Nobel Prizes in the field of virology.
Along with Facebook. Zuckerberg's all over that.
Yeah, he is. When he's not on Epstein's Island getting a suntan, when he's not down there, when he's not having an adrenochrome shake for lunch.
I've got to write that down. That's got to be podcast number 4. The Bill Gates connection's got to be our next one, and then we'll go into Zuckerberg in podcast number 4.
I'm chomping this a bit already.
Global virus deaths pass 150,000 as Trump says China hiding toll. This is 18th.
We're sure saving a lot on car accidents, though. Huh?
World coronavirus deaths surged past 150,000 Friday as US President Donald Trump accused China of continuing to cover up its toll, even though Beijing revised figures sharply upward.
It's from China,
the original epicenter of the global pandemic. Moving on to the next.
What do you make of the? Is it the 96%, 4% balance between the Chinese deaths coming from Hubei province against the deaths elsewhere in China? The other 1.4 billion people that have seemingly no big issues with the coronavirus, the COVID-19. Have you considered that?
That isn't something I've researched, and unlike
it's funny,
Facebook,
isn't it?
I don't like to give opinions when I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, do you know the actual the total death toll in China right now?
Well, there's an article that I'll bring up in a minute
that
brings it to account.
Yay.
Yeah, I'm on that.
Okay.
I'm on that already. So moving on to our next article, China lab in focus. Oh, hang on, it's having trouble loading. Well, it loaded fine and now I've been hit with adverts. China lab in focus of coronavirus outbreak. This is from Forbes, and it's Kenneth Raposa.
Yeah.
And he says, for months, anyone who said the new SARS coronavirus might have come out of a virology research lab in Wuhan, China, was dismissed as a right-wing xenophobe. When Zero Hedge, financial news website, whose comment section certainly.
How's Craig's Facebook page? he's a right-wing xenophobe. Really? Jesus. Madness, Jim. Madness.
So when Zero Hedge, a financial news website, whose comment section certainly fits the right-wing stereotype, first put out its own bombastic version of the bat-borne virus escaping a research lab, they were banned from Twitter. So it's not just Facebook.
course.
There you go.
Well, you don't think Twitter's a fucking totalitarian construct either? Come on.
Fox
They're even worse in some regards.
Started banging this drum last week, but on Tuesday, the narrative flipped. It's no longer a story shared by China bears and President Trump fans. Today, Josh Rogin, who is said to be as plugged into the State Department as any Washington Post columnist, was shown documents dating back to 2015 revealing how the US government was worried about safety standards at that same Wuhan lab. In fact, they were worried that one day, one of these experiments, including the one on bat coronaviruses, could escape.
The one that they financed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there you go. That's yet another article saying that. And I'm going to...
they never talk about that when they're doing a coronavirus task force update. You never see Fauci say, oh, by the way, I'm pretty familiar with this virus. I might be more familiar with it than you know because I was the guy who secured the funds from the National Institute of Health under the Obama administration and financed this actual study itself. I was the one that greased the wheels for them to go, it was 1,000 miles away, I think, to get the bats. And they now think that the COVID-19 is about 96% of that original SARS being piggybacked with the HIV additions on it. You familiar with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they're.
I'm familiar with it, but those aren't the articles I've got queued up today.
Oh!
We'll do that on our next podcast, I reckon. Let's get our audience walking before they can run, I reckon.
Yeah. You're not in focus right now, by the way, Jim, and I don't mean philosophically.
The reason I say that is because the amount of people in our comedy industry that dismissed anything other than the batsuit theory as total conspiracy
Isn't it funny?
And called for anyone who shared that information to be banned, which then Facebook took on board. So that statement I previously made may have sounded
every day for me, Jim.
But you've got to have looked at it from my point of view and what I was seeing from people in
it's
my
incredible.
industry. My actual friends outside of the industry were pretty open-minded.
Well, maybe they're not as dumb. Maybe they're just. Maybe they're just. Their intellect is different.
Who knows?
Maybe.
All I'm doing is
I'm just going to go with maybe they're smarter guys. Like just in general. Like if you were in a shipwreck scenario, that you might be better in a lifeboat with some of Jim's random friends than you would be with a swathe of random comedians who apparently think for a living, but not that much.
I just want to get the truth out.
Let's go more extrapolating. I know you like to stay in the realms of truth, but let's get to like the odds, Jim. The odds that if indeed it did naturally morph from either a bat or what's the other crazy creature that they keep talking about, the type of it's a weird looking like armadillo little guy, like almost like the civet. Yes, yeah. What are they called?
I referenced it in the last article, but
yes. Well, if it did indeed, and perhaps people talk about a snake, so maybe it jumped from the bat to the snake to the palo thing to the back to the bat, and then someone was eating a bat and they got on their chin and then they like bit their lip and then we're off. Like that story is potentially true, but then you have to see it in context of, or just over there. Like right down the road from the seafood wet market, which of course we now know didn't even have bats in it, which is a funny caveat to this entire conversation. However, you then have to leap to the conclusion that it probably wasn't the bio lab that studies exactly that type of pathogen on a regular basis with documented proof in Nature magazines and medical studies going directly to addresses with dates. It's so beyond ridiculous to assume that can't be possible when it's quite obviously much more likely. It's incredible. That's why I always bring, and you're welcome to as well, Jim, that's why I always bring the added element, and I believe it's a sad, frustrating element of this, that there's a cognitive dissonance regarding the desire to fall for the false trick that Chinese people and China's just dirty and they just like can't stop eating weird stuff. And if they stopped eating weird stuff, we'd all be a lot safer. And I'm afraid that when people think like that, when they allow their head to go into that space of precognitive hate, that presupposition of dominance, of racism, outright racism, I think that their brain doesn't work as well to cognitively understand other possibilities. And it just seems that like they're blind to that potential. And I honestly, I mention it to them all the time. I'm an inflammatory prick online. I hate them for it. I actually hate them for it. Because it's obviously a product of not thinking properly. And it's quite sad. This is my daughter's Easter bunny's ears.
My strategy is no matter what anyone has said to me, I'm always willing to try and get through as many articles that I think are truthful to them as possible. I forgive them all. I just want them to start to think for themselves. You've got a library at your fingertips, the internet, which puts anything the Library of Alexandria has into insignificance. It's time to use it, think for oneself. And that includes not listening to us.
I don't want your face
read the
online,
articles, click them through. Do a search. I was about to say Google search, but instead I'm going to go for DuckDuckGo search because I think it's a little bit more interesting.
Give me 1 second, Jim. What are you asking? You want to have burgers outside? Yeah. Okay, Daddy will be down in a couple of minutes. We'll have hamburgers outside on the barbecue.
So the police don't turn up.
Yeah. So, okay. Go downstairs now, though, with Mummy, please. Okay. And Daddy will be right down. I love you.
While they're doing that, I'm going to read out for our next article. This is from the Telegraph, and this is from April the 15th. This is John Hemmings. This is the World Health Organization has come under China's growing and malign influence. President Trump has announced that the United States will stop funding the World Health Organization, a specialized UN agency, saying its Sinocentric behavior has been a catalyst for the global spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. For the blissfully ignorant, this is merely the latest evidence of his America First approach toward foreign policy. However, for those who have been watching the UN system, Trump is absolutely correct. There is something rotten in the state of Denmark, we are going to have to confront it sooner or later. For many of us, the COVID-19, and it just continues there. And
just speaking truth, just right there, speaking truth.
Telegraph subscriber, which I don't want to be. So, and then any comments on that?
Yeah, I think that the guys on the notes, the old Hemster there, Hemming, was it?
It is John Hemmings.
Hemmings, yeah, all over it. I'd say he's all over it. I'd say he's, working whether he desires to or not for the narrative of the Yanks, for sure. He's like, he's buttressing Trump's decision, but I'm 100% behind that decision because the WHO health tyranny, or communist medicine, as they like to promote, which is basically just a ranting and raving, overly influential Bill Gates yabbering about 7.7 billion people needing his freaky RNA vaccine, one of the 9 or 10 or 50 that he's right now financing, with the hope that 2 of them will be effective, when everybody who has any clue in any way looked into it knows the horrible reaction that's happened. Well, we can go immediately to a good example of presenting to people the risk of a RNA type vaccine, which to date has only ever been used in animals, like livestock, by veterinarians, not in humans, other than the most recent trials, is because of the massive and catastrophic effect that it's had on the animals, particularly mice and ferrets, that they have experimented on with these vaccines in the past, particularly after the SARS outbreak in 2003. So the not only the catastrophic effect of the vaccines on their subjects, but particularly when the live virus was introduced to them, I believe a month later, they let a lag time between the first injection and the live virus as an experiment, and the vicious result on the animals led to the ones that not dying needing for humanitarian reasons to be put down. So it's a famously temperamental job to create a coronavirus vaccine. And to the degree, what I was about to say is that, you know, you can talk till you're blue in the face with people about how risky it is and how much of a high risk it is against actually being one of the 99.999% of the people that could possibly catch this COVID-19. And, you know, upwards of, they think at least 80, almost 90% of them, they believe, won't even show symptoms. The majority of people just wouldn't even know they had it. Had a sniffles for a couple of days and then just got on with their lives. It's only like acutely dangerous in certain particular, you know, comorbidity scenarios of people in our society. It's the rarest thing that anybody who has a functioning, you know, capable immune system would be detrimented to any dangerous degree by this in the whole, in the main. However, you know, talking blue in the face till you're blue in the face with people about this reality, you know, you gain no traction. But I like to present to them that two of, and most people don't, you know, I guess follow this or think to, but you know, I'm pretty up to date on keeping track of where they're at with vaccines, and you know, international vaccine programs like are championed by the WHO incessantly. It's their product. It's what they do. They can, you know, try and get them into more and younger people, just like trying to sell cigarettes in the 70s. You know, they just need a market for more. You notice even in the last couple of years, they don't just want one flu vaccine for the flu season. They now believe that you need a booster. You know, this vaccine that's proven through countless studies to not be more efficacious than actually just you know, drinking water or walking, you know, in the park. They trying to create studies that show flu vaccines are better than not having one has ever, you know, at best come out 50-50. There's never been anything definitive that says flu vaccines, you know, save your life from flu. And quite the opposite is true. Most people know this, that you'll get the flu to a degree, and a lot of people suffer quite greatly for it. But regardless of all, you know, that nonsense, the people that most want you to have vaccines in the world, the most pro-vaccine advocates that exist. One is a Mr. Paul Offit, who has, you know, his own agenda and is related to the CDC in the States. But the other one, who I'm going to put on right now, I like to play for people because they just seem not to know. The most, you know, vaccine pro or you know, positive people that I speak to or interact with don't seem to know that the most pro, like, you know, next to Paul Offit, perhaps the most pro vaccine advocate on the earth, a pediatrician named Mr. Peter Hotez, is like, he's 100%, he's like vaccinate everything. Like, you know, you got the sniffles, you eat a carrot, you go for, you know, a jog, you should have a vaccine for, what are you half a minute old? You need a vaccine. Are you 6 months old? You need a 95 vaccine. You get vaccines. There's measles over there. Measles. He's like one of the biggest pro-vaccine freaks on the planet. And now we're going to get a chance to see what he thinks.
No, I haven't seen this, so
yeah. Well, get
okay.
get ready here, because he's pretty.
I think what we need to do is podcast number 5.
Yeah.
Write it down. We'll do a whole vaccine stuff, so we can actually look at nice documented, factual medical reports. That's what I like. I like to go through, stick to facts, and
yes. Well,
give this. Well, I think we should do that in a whole whole podcast.
Well, let's give this a listen, Jim.
Let's give why not? Let's give it a go.
A 4-minute clip, and this is this is Mr. Peter Hotez. He's Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development co-director, and is, by anybody's estimation, certainly anecdotally from myself, if not one of the most vaccine pro humans on the planet. Here's what he has to say about developing a coronavirus vaccine, particularly with the potential to save all our lives from COVID-19.
Biotechs nor the big pharmaceutical companies make those vaccines. And for reasons that we'll explore this morning, we also took on a decade ago the interesting problem of making coronavirus vaccines, because we recognize these as enormous public health threats, and yet we have not seen the big pharma guys and the biotechs rushing into this space. So we partnered with a group at the New York Blood Center and the Galveston National Laboratory to take on the big scientific challenge of coronavirus vaccines. And I say a scientific challenge because one of the things that we're not hearing a lot about is the unique potential safety problem of coronavirus vaccines. This was first found in the early 1960s with the respiratory syncytial virus vaccines, and it was done here in Washington with the NIH and Children's National Medical Center, that some of those kids who got the vaccine actually did worse, and I believe there were 2 deaths in the consequence of that study. Because what happens with certain types of respiratory virus vaccines, you get immunized, and then when you get actually exposed to the virus, you get this kind of paradoxical immune enhancement phenomenon. And we don't entirely understand the basis of it, but we recognize that it's a real problem for certain respiratory virus vaccines. That killed the RSV program for decades. Now the Gates Foundation is taking it up again. But when we started developing coronavirus vaccines, and our colleagues, we noticed in laboratory animals that they started to show some of the same immune pathology that resembled what had happened 50 years earlier. So we said, oh my God, this is going to be problematic. But we collaborated with a unique group that figured out how to solve the problem, that if you narrow it down to the smallest subunit, the piece that of what's called the receptor binding domain that docks with the receptor, you get protection and you don't get that immune enhancement phenomenon. So we were really excited about that, and we proposed this to the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. They funded it, and we wound up actually making and manufacturing, in collaboration with Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, a first-generation SARS vaccine. So SARS was the one that emerged in 2003. And then this new one, of course, we call the SARS-2 coronavirus. We had it manufactured, but then we could never get the investment to take it beyond that. So that was really unfortunate, because we had the vaccine ready to go, but we couldn't move it into the clinic because of lack of funding, because by then nobody was interested in coronavirus vaccines. When the Chinese started putting up the data on bioRxiv in January, February, we saw very close homology between the two and realized that we may be sitting on a very attractive coronavirus vaccines. Now we're working with NIH, and we'll work with BARDA and others to get the funding. But now we'll have that lag. And these clinical trials are not going to go quickly because of that immune enhancement. It's going to take time. So, and unfortunately, some of my colleagues in the biotech industry are making these inflated claims. You've seen this on the newspapers. We're going to have this vaccine in weeks, or in this and that. What they're really saying is they can move a vaccine into clinical trials, but this will not go quickly, because as we start vaccinating human volunteers, especially in areas where we have community transmission, we're going to have to proceed very slowly, very cautiously. The FDA is on top of that. They have a great team in place at the Center for Biologics Evaluation Research. They're aware of the problem, but it's not going to go quickly. We are going to have to follow this very slowly, cautiously, to make certain we're not seeing that immune enhancement. So now we're hearing projections a year, 18 months. Who knows? This is not going to go quickly. The bottom line is, had we had those investments early on, to carry this all the way through clinical trials years ago, we could have had a vaccine ready to go. So we've got to figure out what the ecosystem is going to be to develop vaccines that are not going to make money. The big pharma companies are still not going in. Some of the biotechs are.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I think we should do a whole podcast on vaccines
and so there's no
in the
model
future.
to figure out who's going to pay for them. So there's a consequence.
To bring us back onto the whole,
just let me shut
and for reasons that we'll explore
this
morning.
While you do that, you mentioned at the start of your intro various things. Here's an article to back up what you were saying. This is from the Mail Online, and it is by Francis Mulroney and Glenn Owen on the 12th of April 2020.
Yeah.
And the headline reads, revealed, US government gave 3.7 million grant to Wuhan Lab at Center of Coronavirus Leak Scrutiny that was performing experiments on bats from the caves where the disease is believed to have originated. The US National Institutes of Health, a government agency, awarded a 3.7 million research grant to the Wuhan Institute.
Like the crazy comedian guy said.
The lab is the center of several conspiracy theories that suggest this is the original
right-wing, xenophobic ones.
The institute experimented on bats from the source of the coronavirus.
Yeah.
They were captured more than 1,000 miles away in Yunnan.
Yes.
The sequencing of the COVID-19 genome has traced it to the bats to Yunnan's cave.
Yeah.
The US government funded research on coronavirus transmission in the lab over the past decade.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to, the revelation that the Wuhan Institute was experimenting on bats from the area already known to be the source of COVID-19 and doing so with American money has sparked further fears that the lab and not the market is the original outbreak source.
I've never done that before, Jim. Really?
You want to do it the back of your ears. Do it the back of your ears. It looks better.
Does it?
Do it from the back of the ears.
Well, how does that work?
You know, the levers at the back, you know, where they hook over the ears.
Oh, sorry. Oh, goodness. Oh.
There you go.
Hey, I haven't had these glasses for long. I don't know all the funny glasses tricks. So that was pretty much all the crazy shit I was talking about. That's that.
Yeah. The US Congressman Matt Gaetz said, "I'm disgusted to learn that for years the US government has been funding dangerous and cruel animal experiments at the Wuhan Institute, which may have contributed
China virus. It's from China. It's the virus from China.
So that may have contributed to the global spread of coronavirus.
Was it?
And research at other labs in China that have virtually no oversight from US authorities." Great.
There we are. Well, that's why they're doing it. That's what the game is, right? They, to my knowledge, it's mentioned that they study there because the rest of the world, particularly the Western world, doesn't like to study on primates. And I think if we, there's already suggestion that there's been untoward, nefarious behavior regarding the Uyghurs and the Falun Gong prisoners. So if you think that these things aren't being studied on humans in China, it's probably, I think we're being a bit naive. But, if you're willing to harvest organs, I think probably prior to that experimentation is more than likely. But that's not to say, you and I both know that the Brits and the Americans study bioweapons on their own people, including weather enhancment on their own people. These are, known events. So I think the weather enhancement results are more considered conspiracy, but there's definitely the experimentation on random cities of biological agents. So that that's taking place, and not even counting before you get into the anthrax attacks and all of that stuff that we know exists. So I mean, I don't want to say it's only China, but the idea that China isn't doing that is being, I think, a little bit
I'll archive of that.
I'll bet. Time for another time. How are we looking for time today, Jim? Do we get some done, or how are you feeling?
I still want to go for another 20 minutes if that works.
Yeah, great. Then pound through. Give me some gear. All that stuff mirrored everything I think, so I can't wait to hear more.
So China scuffles coronavirus research in apparent bid to control narrative, analysts say. And this is Fox News by Frank Miles. Mm-hmm. 2 websites for leading universities in China seem to have published and then deleted academic research about the origins of the coronavirus, according to a report. The posts on the website of Fudan University and China University of Geosciences Wuhan were erased from online caches in a possible bid to control the narrative surrounding the pandemic, The Guardian reported. So anyone
I was going to say they're worse than The Guardian.
Yes, so anyone who goes, oh, Fox News, that's right-wing, well, they're just mirroring what a left-wing institution has said. Yeah. So, again, I go back to what I said in the last podcast. Yeah. Who says it? Look into it. I really don't care who says it if it's accurate. So the Wuhan University appears to have published and then deleted posts about the academic research. Moving on, Taiwan releases December email to WHO showing unheeded warning about coronavirus. So it's not just Trump that's got a beef with him. Yeah. Having said that, Taiwan's relationship with China is that of a hamster to a snake, really. Yeah. I mean, they're next door neighbours, and China has got their prying eye on them, I think. So,
well, they did take all of China's gold. So, when Chiang Kai-shek, got on the boat for the last time, he had some trinkets. I get it.
I haven't researched that, but the World Health Organization is under fire after Taiwan released the contents of its December email inquiring about the person-to-person spread of COVID-19, which it says was ignored by the organization and further denied to provide adequate information about how to fight the virus. Taiwan is accusing the World Health Organization of downplaying the severity and spread of the coronavirus in an attempt to pander to China, who I believe is one of their biggest donors, even after Taiwan sounded the alarm about at least 7 cases of atypical pneumonia that they were aware of in Wuhan, where the virus originated.
I hate to speak out of turn, but I think it's that the main funders for the WHO started with the Yanks, and then I believe Bill Gates was second, and then I believe the Brits, and then I believe the Chinese, if I'm recalling. So now the Yanks, to the tune of whatever 400, 500 million, aren't there. But next in line, I believe, will be the Brits, which plays terrifyingly in in global geopolitics regarding what are the Brits going to do? They've got so much WHO policy invested in their own decisions. They were using the University College London Imperial College model to spook their populace into their homes and to use as an excuse to reinforce this lockdown that they're involved in. That school has been heavily to the tune of, I think, about 200 million. I don't know if that's pounds or dollars invested from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to the Imperial College London. So there's a massive influence there. You've got that entity now being isolated and exculpated from the American model by Trump. So what are the Brits going to do? Are they going to stay in bed with Gates and the WHO and their directives and continue to push this communist medicine model of one size fits all medicine and just inject them all and let God sort it out type of medicine? Or are they going to see what Donald Trump or his administration is pointing out of the nefarious behavior of the WHO and see Gates's role in it, in having a finger in every pie and fingers in pies that stand to benefit from international mandated vaccines, including the ID 2020 operation that he's deeply committed to now. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Brits do on this, what Cummings does, what Matt Hancock does, what Boris Johnson, if he ever comes out of hiding, decides to do next, if he decides to do anything next now that Rob is in charge, and he shouldn't be in charge of his own lunch. So, we're in a pretty terrifying free fall. And I hope to see at some point that they just get on board with the Yanks and realize that the WHO has been a fifth columnist in Western nations, behaving like a cowboy and having an overt influence from a eugenicist, depopulationist megalomaniac like Bill Gates. It's going to be interesting to see.
Fox News. Sources believe coronavirus outbreak originated in Wuhan lab as part of China's efforts to compete with US. Exclusive, and this is
that might be a leap
from Brett Beyer, and the date doesn't seem to come forth with me. There is increasing confidence that the COVID-19 outbreak likely originated in a Wuhan laboratory, though not as a bioweapon, but as part of China's attempt to demonstrate that its efforts to identify and combat viruses are equal to or greater than the capabilities of the United States.
Also possible.
So again, we're just covering the same thing again. I wanted to go on now, just shift to what we've seen, some of the police behaviour in the UK, if that's okay with you.
Is that somebody sunbathing?
I want to preface this by saying there are reports of bad
overreach.
Yeah. However, when you consider how many police officers there are in the UK,
there's like 8,
there
right?
aren't that many reports of being. I would like to point out that I believe the majority of the police are doing a great job under very difficult circumstances.
Although they're doing it far too close together with not enough personal protection on and no masks.
What I wanted to point out was
they're doing such a great job. They're high-fiving and hugging each other for some reason.
I've always been against the Iraq War, and back in the early days,
you're such a sane man, Jim.
I was called anti-soldier by people couldn't distinguish with the fact that I was pro-soldier by questioning them. And
you didn't want any of them to die unjustly for the wrong reasons.
Exactly, and without the
valid,
correct kit.
Yeah.
So
true.
I wanted to point out that when I'm pointing out these behaviours of the police, I'm not having a go at them. I am
for protecting pedophiles officially,
so that the rest of the good police, who are by far the majority,
who don't know what's going on, the naive cops. Jim talks for the naive cops. They're just like, what? We officially protect pedophiles? What? I didn't even know. Anyway, that guy's going too fast.
Good policemen.
The good ones. The good ones.
And they're doing a fantastic job. But the bad apples are ruining it for them. So these people, the bad
non-Masons,
need to have attention towards them, so that they can either get the correct education on what the law is they're supposed to be enforcing, or they need to be put away. And I'd also like to point out the human nature aspect of it.
Sure.
And there is
a lot of people don't have an instinct to read. It's a human nature. What? I'd rather just be drinking beers and talking about football.
It is human nature
to not read.
To
what your job is.
To get crazed on power. And
there's a whole
YouTube documentary called The Stanford Prison Experiment by Zimbardo that I'm going to put in the comment section, which is all about when people, normal people are given power. These people were split into prisoners and guards, and the prisoners went way over the top.
Just following orders!
It's human nature. So when I'm asking for the bad police to have their behaviour reined in and possibly educated on what the law is, I'm not anti-police, I'm pro-police, and I just want the bad ones to be weeded out or educated so that the rest of the police don't get a bad name. I'm pro-police.
Yeah, that has to happen really quick, Jim. That's just like the longer this lockdown goes and the longer the government goes lockdown in free fall without an end game, and the longer they stay colluding and not admitting that they've been colluding with insincere actors in their national health, including the aforementioned Bill Gates and the Niall Ferguson debacle of Imperial College London, a guy who was wrong on foot and mouth, who was wrong on swine flu, he's just a famous hyperbolist now. He's a guy who the government calls when they want to freak out the public with inflated numbers. And as long as the British government decides not to take that bull by the horns and either begin to explain themselves or give an end game that isn't just entirely committed to having everybody on a database and either with a tattoo or a grain of rice with all of their news, weather, and sports information of their lives, inserted into their bodies, including to take track of their acceptance and approval of mandatory vaccinations with, as a yet a not created vaccine. Even you heard that Hotez guy talk about it. They're talking about like 2 years if they can prevent. You noticed his terminology, the pathological effect, on animals. That's like scientific speak for they all died. Like what happened with the pathology? Pathology doesn't happen when things are like alive, unless you've got like flesh-eating disease. You might have a pathology that's about to kill you. But like these are pie in the sky pipe dreams that are being put out by the New Zealand government. Ardern has made a commitment with the bloodstreams of her unsuspecting country people that they aren't getting out of their homes until a vaccine is, in them, or that there is a record of them taking it. Trudeau and Canada entirely sold out to the WHO and international communism. A sellout to his own people, a traitor to his own country. He has committed the bloodstreams of his entire populace. Same threat, same BS that Boris Johnson and the freaks over here, Nadine Dorries, Hancock, all of these freaky, panic merchant, living fantasy people who don't even address the fact that a vaccine doesn't exist, but that British people aren't allowed out of their homes until they have it. And we're dealing in an insane world where these dorks are given any attention by anybody, let alone national broadcasters, to publicize their insanity towards people. They're threatening insanity to their country people. And that includes the BBC giving airtime to Bill Gates for the exact same agenda. So we're in a place of huge crossroads of human history, and thank goodness we're seeing, if you're seeing it all out of the States right now, Lansing, Michigan, North Dakota hasn't even accepted the government's federal lockdown. Texas is in insurrection. Their governor isn't accepting or is talking about relieving them of their coronavirus lockdown. The state of California is having, I believe, on the 20th, a free, open up our state. There's insurrection everywhere, and it's all coming from the states. Speaking out of turn, Germany similarly has had some resistance to the lockdown. We know that Sweden as a country hasn't accepted the draconian diktats that the British government has put upon its people. We're in a place of huge upheaval, and it looks like the Brits are just like normal British medical prowess over the centuries, just like bloodletting and witchcraft is still the main thrust of the game, are still talking like it's the Middle Ages. They're still talking like they're going to keep people in their homes for 2 years unless some as yet uninvented vaccine comes onto the market, that they're going to make sure that at that point that you don't, I'm sure they'll go soft coercion like the Yanks have done in California and New Jersey with their mandated vaccines, preventing you from getting a driver's license, preventing you from going on trains, not letting you go into malls or, places of worship or big gatherings. All of this nonsense, draconian, Orwellian, freaky nonsense is coming out of the British government. And that, to me, trickles down to their effect on the British, both military and police. We're in the most terrifying time that we've ever been, I'd say, since the Black Death in this part of the world. It's embarrassing.
Now, before I go on to some of the police's behaviour, I just want people to bear in mind this article. Britain's furious as UK not testing 15,000 a day arriving in UK airports. Just remember that. That's from the Express. Don't like the Express? Fair enough. I'll include
Go down to Heathrow and count them wrong.
Oh, well, that's fine, because I've got numerous mainstream sources saying this exact same thing. So just bear that in mind. 15,000 arriving in the UK every day, not being tested when I go through the following articles. So, hospital staff claim police told them their NHS IDs were not proof of essential travel after being stopped on their way to work. A small number of staff at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge was stopped. They showed their NHS ID to police when asked on their way to and from work. Cambridgeshire Constabulary have reminded officers of acceptable ID.
Wow. And this, of course, coming from a part of the world where fox hunting is still pretty much a fun thing to do on the weekend, and the chances of getting the cops to show up for that, other than to high-five the fox hunters and the judge on his steed that's probably ruling over them, is more common than that bit of insanity that you just explained.
Yeah, that article was from Leah Kay for Mail Online.
I keep saying this online, Jim. I keep saying that the British cops have proven themselves to be the kings and queens of soft target bullying. Sorry. Some of them are giving the others a hideous reputation.
Oh, I seem to have frozen. Can you hear me?
It's a good look, though.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay, but yeah, you're frozen. You're like...
frozen. Okay, I've loaded up a... it came before anyone...
You got a hint of mischief going on. You got one eyebrow a bit. Oh, there you go. Your action. There you go. Yeah.
There we go.
There you go.
Before anyone said it's a conspiracy theory, it happened just as I happened to load this particular page. So, all right. So
you need to get some RAM over there.
For the paranoia. So this is from LBC, and it is police under fire for telling dad he can't play with his kids in his own front garden. A police officer has been. This is by Adrian Sherling. A police officer has been filmed telling a dad that he's not allowed to play with his children in his own front garden. The South Yorkshire police officer approached Daniel Connell as he played with his two very young children in his own front garden in Rotherham, Eastwood.
Yeah, most people also don't know that Rotherham and South Yorkshire has been instrumental in the abhorrent child sex grooming gangs that have been famously not acted upon by the police for fear of stoking racial tensions. So not only
number 7.
Yeah, and sadly, also in that precinct, officers were found to be involved in the abuse of children and the returning of children to vulnerable scenarios, which they were repeatedly raped in, and some of them, I'm not going to say many, but definitely some, then went on to kill themselves. So that this particular precinct of busybodies, I think you could call somebody who's bothered in time of crisis for the nation to bother a man on his stoop about whether or not he's allowed to play ball with his child in his front yard, while the cop car hovers in the background idling, which nobody wants in front of their house to begin with, but that this is the type of business that they deem valid and necessary during a time when people are already under stress and tensions are in some way frayed. It's just it's unbelievable, but it's I do concur with you on this point, Jim, that that's just like an isolated incident of a particularly dim, I'm going to say, couple of cops. It was definitely one dim cop, the one that was doing the intimidating on the stoop. But bear in mind, there's another cop sitting in the car idling away, doing his nails or doing her nails, whatever. I don't know who they got in there. With British policing, who knows? you're dealing with a very I don't know what their justification can be for the type of behavior that they're engaging in. It just doesn't make sense. I can't imagine why they wanted that man to be intimidated, why they wanted his kids to get that impression of what a police officer is or should be doing. It's just poor policing. It's what I was making fun of earlier, just not reading, not knowing what their job is, not knowing what laws they're supposed to be enforcing or not, and just being meatheads. Yeah, she brought up, if you recall, I don't know if you've watched the video yourself, but she brought up the old caveat, thousands are dying! Thousands! There's thousands dying! I'm here annoying you on your front porch because thousands are dying! And you're somehow involved in the thousands dying if you're playing, hopscotch with your children in front of your house. It's just, they are in a world of fantasy and absurdity akin to a bad plot line of a zombie film. This is what we're dealing with our, and that's not just police. That's like, your average Joe on the street as well. People have a lot of injected hyperbole in their minds of what like actual threat levels are to themselves, and I've been hearing, you may have as well, even more recently, the embellishment of of the risk and the distance of risk. It was like it was a meter and 6 feet, and now it's like fucking the virus can jump 27 feet and break through a wall of flame. It can it's just all these ridiculous new threat levels that we're supposed to be terrified by, and the police just shouldn't be involved in that kind of bullying, in that kind of psychological bullying attempt. It's horrible. It's embarrassing.
The police, like us, are in a situation they've never been in before, so I can forgive a learning curve for us all.
Sure.
And I would ask the vast majority of the policemen who are good people to look at some of the behaviour of their colleagues, especially things like this. And the reason that I would ask them to do that is because whenever a weak mind is given power, they'll gas Jews for you. They'll burn witches for
that
you.
escalated quickly.
Do you know what I mean? What I'm saying is
that Godwin's law enacted?
Their history books are full.
And another thing about Hitler and the South Yorkshire Police Department.
I'm just saying that is way away, and what we're seeing is nowhere near that. I'm just saying that going back to the Zimbardo study, it is human nature, and nothing to do with the police, nothing to do with the police in 2020. It is human nature for us as humans to go a little bit too far when given power. You and I have probably gone too far on stage with audience members from time to time.
Guilty!
We are not perfect. No one is perfect. That's my point. So we need checks and balances.
I got both of no one's perfect and guilty. I got both of those ones.
So
tick.
So here we go. This is by Zoe Druitt, and this is from the Metro. Police threaten to search shopping trolleys to check you're only buying essentials. Now, as far
they
as
did
I'm
backtrack. They had to backtrack, but still.
This is from Thursday, the 9th of April. This is what I'm saying. Perhaps the police are not necessarily at fault here. They have not been given the correct guidelines. Do not blame the student if the teacher has provided a bad lesson. So,
well, it turned out that that was a Northamptonshire. But it turned out. I don't know if you got the backstory on that, but it turned out that that officer had rabies, and he'd also been bullied as a child. So there was a confluence of we're gonna check your shopping trolley and make sure you got just enough in there. And then they dragged him off and deep faked his image, and then made him apologize at a very strange setting in a conference room. I don't know if you caught the climb down. The climb down was just as weird as the original. It's like, okay, can we? It was like getting a hook on him. Can we get that guy out of here for a second? Because he ain't helping nobody do nothing.
I just question the logic of such an action, because in order to do that, you're going to have to get close to someone. And someone can ask, well, in that, we're using it as a deterrent for next time. Okay, well, they're still going to the same shop. So it makes no difference. You either stop someone going to the shop. It's a binary thing. They either go to the shop and get exposed, or they don't. What they're buying doesn't necessarily expose them to the virus any more or less than the original journey to the shops.
And it's commerce, Jim. It's commerce. It's incredible. It's as insane as them being feigning that they're concerned about our health when they're stopping people from going out in the sun. It's as incongruent a thought as, like, now they're involved in restricting people selling things. The best thing that can happen right now in this, like you and I both know, we haven't even tapped into one of the great crimes that's going on in our midst, is the fact that they've destroyed the economy through their behavior. That's one of the main reasons that people want out of this, is because they don't want a collapse. They don't want a Great Depression. They don't want more people to lose jobs, like the 22 to 25 million that lost their jobs in America in the last week. They don't want any more implosion of the economy. Sane minds are telling this, but at the same time, you got cops talking about, like, not selling things other than, like, selected items. It's madness. It's counter economic viability, and it's counter sincerity of interest in real issues like the collapse of the economy. On, people are like, oh yeah, a lot of people might be out of work after this. Maybe only international conglomerate type companies can survive this, or the ones that the government is basically stealing from us to bail out. It's happening in Canada, happened to the tune of 6 point something trillion in the States. All this huge money is being printed by the Fed to, bring us to stability financially, but at the same time, they're not wanting people to sell anything. It's cross purposes. It's showing an insincerity of intent that you, in one hand, want people to not lose their jobs or their livelihoods, but in another hand, you don't want them to buy excessively from the people who are allowed to even trade during this crisis. It's very we're in very, very strange times regarding that. And sorry to interrupt again, Jim, to have to say, people keep talking about, a lot of people are losing their jobs, or there could be a long recession after this. And I keep, adding to friends' timelines to suggest, and what do we know about the Great Depression? Other than, like, the Great Depression itself, a great book, if you follow Pierre Burton, well worth it. Well worth it to think that in my lifetime, grandparents' age people had to boil shoes. Watch The Grapes of Wrath again. It's like people died wholesale of starvation. Like, the Great Depression was hideous. If that happens to us, we're talking, like, literally millions upon millions upon millions of deaths. There's no reason right now to assume that's not going to happen. But the other thing that we know about the Great Depression chronologically is what happened immediately after that, and that was World War II. And the reason that World War II happened is because it's really easy to get hungry men into warm clothes and to point guns at people. That's what's going on. And the fact that they, aren't going to do that to us, or that that's not going to happen to us, if you don't want to be that conspiratorial, I'm going to say, like, don't be so naive. That could happen tomorrow.
I wanted to go into impacts today, but I think that's just too much of a new subject to go into. We could do that in a future podcast. The idea that Trump is putting the economy first just because of the money, it's not about that. Food shortages, power cuts, they're going to make coronavirus victims,
It's going to go on forever, Jim.
Yeah. So
it's the golden goose. Keeps giving.
Now,
it's the excuse for everything.
I want to give a shout out, a good positive shout out to Lancashire Police. This is an article from today, the 18th of April, by Simon.
24-hour period, no raping. Not one of their officers raped anybody. We just got to celebrate what we can when we can. Sorry, is this a different story? Nobody in custody was fist fucked. So we got a bowling trophy that we're sorry, Joe. You're saying
he's at home now. He's at home now.
Sorry.
So no, a different article, funnily enough.
Oh yeah. Okay, sorry.
Was this is from Fleetwood Today, and it's by Simon Drury, and it was update: Chief Constable apologises after officer threatened to make up something to charge driver. Lancashire police have apologised and launched an investigation after footage on social media appeared to show an officer threatening to fabricate a charge to lock a young man up. He was pulled over by the police yesterday afternoon after returning to buy a quad bike for his stepson. It is believed the man is from Accrington. It is believed the man involved had been put out of his car on Friday afternoon It is believed the man involved had been out in his car on Friday afternoon in order to buy a quad bike for his stepson before being pulled over by the police in the video. Yeah. The young man is heard saying, "You're harassing me. What for? I've done nothing wrong." Yeah. The officer then be heard saying, "Do you want me to show you the definition of harassment?" The young man can then be heard saying, "But I've done nothing wrong." To which the officer says, "I will make something up. Public order, squaring up to a police officer. Shall I do that?" Who are they going to believe?
Jim, sorry, I'm going to have to stop you for a second. My daughter's not leaving.
That's okay. I'll just carry on. Throughout the video, the young man appeared calm and didn't raise his voice or challenge the police officer. Posting on social media, the man said, "He started to hail abuse at me, threatening me and saying he will make something up to lock me away. His words were, 'Who are they going to believe, me or you?'" The matter is being investigated and has been referred to our professional standards department, a spokesman for the police said. "It is clear from the footage the member of the public deserves an apology, which we will attempt to provide him with today." This afternoon, Chief Constable Andy Rhodes said, "Further to our initial statement regarding video footage widely circulating an incident in Accrington involving one of our officers and a member of the public, I can provide additional information." So just one point to point out there. Yeah. This is why it's important to film the police, and it is always legal and lawful to do so, in the best of my knowledge, on public properties, when you're not filming into someone's window or something into their private property, from what I understand. Yeah. And without that footage, really the police officer was right. Who would they believe? So my point on that is, that isn't coronavirus specific. All policemen know you can't fabricate evidence against someone. So there's a learning curve on the whole shopping trolley thing with coronavirus. I get that, and I'm not unsympathetic to the police's doing a difficult job in unknown circumstances. However, that police officer, there's no excuse for that, in my opinion.
No, and there's been some real trouble during this last even couple of weeks of the police not reacting well to being filmed in the UK, and they've been behaving absolutely hideously toward a number of 3 that I can think of right now, incidences involving citizen journalists. And it's just, it's abhorrent, and they need to root it out. They need it rooted out. There's absolutely not one reason you can come up with why, as you say, in a public area, why any member of the public should not be and can't be, for any reason that they produce on the spot, filming public servants' behavior in public. And the moment that the police get into a place of where they're resisting that, or saying that it shouldn't be happening, or to turn cameras off, or physically making people turn cameras off, is exactly why they need to be filmed doing what they're doing. It's absolutely it's imperative, in fact.
And, Craig, do you want to just switch a light on where you are?
Yes, I was thinking that it was getting a bit.
While you're doing that, I'll just say it's imperative that everyone behaves calmly and lawfully to stop COVID-19 turning into COVID-1984.
Nice.
And
this is my Boris Karloff
Yeah. And I think how about finishing off our last article tonight, if you're cool with that, with this article from The Guardian.
I got a barbecue to start.
And it is, driving to take a walk is lawful during England. Driving to take a walk is lawful during England lockdown. Police told. Reasonable excuses.
So drive to Scotland.
Also
drive to Ben Nevis.
Reasonable excuses also include moving house, buying luxuries, and essential repairs. Right. So there's a list of do's and don'ts on there for everyone on our podcast.
It's worse than doing your goddamn taxes.
Under lockdown are. I'd like to reiterate all these articles that we've gone through, including the video about the Zimbardo prison study. They can all be found on the Cruise Facebook page.
Beautiful.
And they'll all be found on our YouTube video. If you want to find us on YouTube or your friends, we are. I'm presuming if that's the case, they're already watching on Facebook. You can find us at Cruise, Craig Campbell, Jim Grant. Do a search for that. And thank you to our subscribers. I was amazed. I think we had something like an 8% subscriber rate, which is really good for our first video. So
yes, and sorry it's taken so long for the second one. I've been a little bit under the weather, shockingly, and haven't been able to speak with any gusto for nearly a couple of weeks, which was unexpected. But we're wanting to do this more regularly and are hoping to be more regular with it. So that was a bit unfortunate, but please don't consider it a lack of commitment, because we're enjoying this.
I think maybe doing these a couple of times a week would be
damn
if
straight.
That works for me, if that works for you.
Love it.
Check us out on Facebook, like our page, subscribe to us on YouTube, whatever platform works.
Leave a shit comment.
We're going to be going on to new platforms like BitChute and other such things as well. But in the meantime, thanks ever so much for joining us. And any closing comments?
No, just I reiterate the same. No, thanks for listening to our ramblings. We're trying our best to figure out what's going on for you and for ourselves, for our futures, for our families, and we appreciate very much any viewership that you give us. If you like it, please share it, and a pleasure again, and look forward to speaking to Jim soon.
Yeah, and thanks for all the likes and nice comments to our first videos as well, including people who worked in the NHS as well. So,
perfect.
Big thank you to those.
Yay!
Big thank you to all our NHS.
Yeah, be safe out there. Have a great week.
Cheers. Good night.
Good night.